heard to call him Gary, because he reminded them of Gary Cooper, while a rival faction knew him as Dirk, on account of a closer resemblance, in their eyes, to Dirk Bogarde. It could be agreed, at any rate, that Thomas was handsome, but he would have been astonished if anyone had ever told him this, and, once in possession of the knowledge, he would have had no idea what to do with it. Gentleness and humility were the qualities which first struck people upon meeting him, and it was only later, if at all, that they would begin to suspect a certain self-assurance, bordering on arrogance, lying beneath them. In the meantime, he was most often described as a decent sort, and the unassuming, dependable type. He had worked at the COI for 14 years, starting in 1944. When it was called the Ministry of Information, and he was only 18 years old. He had started out as a postboy and worked his way up surely, but very, very slowly, to his present rank as junior copywriter. Now he was 32, and spent most of his working days drafting pamphlets on public health and safety, advising pedestrians of the best way to cross the road and cold sufferers of the best way to avoid spreading germs in public places. Some days he looked back on his childhood and thought about his start in life. Thomas was the son of a pub landlord, and considered that he was doing very well. Other days he found his work tedious and contemptible, and it felt as though he had been doing the same thing for years, and he couldn't wait to find some way of moving on. Brussels had livened things up a bit, that was certain. The COI had been given overall responsibility for the content of the British Pavilion at Expo 58, and this had immediately led to a frenzy of head-scratching and soul-searching around that maddening, elusive topic of Britishness. What did it mean to be British in 1958? Nobody seemed to know. Britain was steeped in tradition, everybody agreed upon that. Its traditions, its pageantry, its ceremony were admired and envied all over the world. At the same time, it was mired in the past, scared of innovation, riddled with archaic class distinctions, enthralled to a secretive and untouchable establishment. Which way were you supposed to look when defining Britishness? Forwards or backwards? It was a difficult conundrum, and the Foreign Secretary was not the only person to be found sitting at his desk in the years leading up to Expo 58, muttering, "Those bloody Belgians," on long afternoons when the answers did not seem to come easily. Some positive steps were taken. James Gardner, many of whose ideas had proved so inspiring at the Festival of Britain 7 years earlier, was engaged as designer of the pavilion, and before long he came up with a geometric exterior which, by general consent, caught just the right combination of modernity and continuity. It had been allocated a very favourable position in the Exposition Park on the Heysel Plateau just north of Brussels. But what should go inside it? Millions of visitors were expected to flock to the Expo from all over the world, including the African and Soviet bloc countries. The Americans and the Soviets were bound to produce national displays on a massive scale. What sort of self-image did the British want to project, given the opportunity of such a vast global stage and such a curious and diverse audience? Nobody appeared to know the answer. But by common consent, Gardner's pavilion was going to be a thing of beauty. That was beyond dispute. And, if it was any consolation, there was one other thing that everybody was agreed about. The pub. Visitors to the Expo would need to be fed and watered, and if the national character was going to be expressed at all, this meant that somehow or other, next to the pavilion, they were going to have to build a British pub. And just in case anybody missed the point, the name of the pub would leave no room for ambiguity. It was going to be called the Brittania. This afternoon, in the middle of February 1958, Thomas was checking the proofs of a pamphlet he had helped put together for sale outside the pavilion. Images of the United Kingdom. There was a small body of text interspersed with attractive woodcut illustrations by Barbara Jones.